Our next project is going to be a green turn bowl. So we're literally changing direction on what we were doing. One, instead of working with dry wood, we're going to work with green wood. So this is unseasoned wood. Anything that is less than dry is considered green wood. The other thing is we're changing the direction of the grain. Where we've been working with the grain running parallel to the axis of the lathe, now we're running the blank with the grain perpendicular to the axis of the lathe. So our cuts are going to change, our tools are going to change. We'll be using bowl gouges versus our spindle gouges. And our spindle gouges have a shorter handle, so they can work in front of the body. They don't have to have the leverage that a bowl gouge needs. We'll be removing larger cuts of wood. A bowl gouge has got a longer handle. More differences will be in the design of the tools. The spindle gouge has a shallow flute. The bowl gouge has a deeper flute. And by deeper, it's cut deeper into the shaft of the steel. You may also notice this bowl's been turned green and it's no longer round. So the wood moves. One way that will compensate later is leave the thickness equal to 10% of the diameter. So an 8-inch bowl, roughly 3/4 of an inch thick, all the way through the bowl, seal that with a green wood sealer and set it aside and wait for it to dry. In that case, we can dry it usually in months, where if I left a solid thick piece, I'm talking years to get dry. The rule of thumb on a solid piece of wood is 1 year per inch of thickness plus a year. So this came out of a 3-inch thick piece of wood. It could have taken up to 4 years to dry this if it was solid. And it's a lot harder to get hold of big, thick bowl blanks out of dry wood. So roughing them out, as we call it, is a much more desirable path to getting the bowl done. The tools we'll be using are our 3/8 and our 1/2-inch diameter bowl gouge. The other tool we'll be using, I'll have one cut that I'll use my 3/8 spindle gouge for. And in general, you don't use spindle tools on a bowl. I am going to use my skew one time. And that's to use it as my Woodturner's pocket knife, because my bowl blank was put in plastic after it was prepared for me from a square blank that was wet. I've got center marked on this piece, and I'm going to start this on a screw center chuck. This one is a multi-piece unit, and the screw center is one, and then the faceplate is another. You may not have something like this. You may have just a single screw that will go into your chuck jaws. That works great. It's a little easier to loosen the shavings. So that's one reason I like this. And then this will run true a second time. You may want to put on just your faceplate. Almost every lathe, when you buy them, comes with a faceplate. But with that, instead of one screw, I'm going to put in 4 to 6 screws. And so for speed, I like to use a screw center faceplate. To use my screw center faceplate, I've got my drill bit, which is sized to my shaft, and I've got a collar on here which allows this bit to only go so deep. I don't want to go any deeper than I need to. If I go too deep, I could have to change the shape of the bowl. I'd rather not commit to the depth of the bowl at this point. Using a low RPM on the lathe, 300 to 400 is all that I need. Keeping your hands open, let the lathe take that out of your hand. and lock it in place. Bring my tailstock up and in place. Set my tool rest for height and the direction I want to go, and turn the piece by hand. I'm hitting the rest, so I need to back it up. We'll start with our 1/2-inch bowl gouge with a fingernail grind. Bring our speed up, about 800 RPM. I've got my bevel pointed in the direction of I want to cut. Start with the handle level, then drop it. That opens up the flute and exposes it to the wood. And I can let the cut come around. Then I repeat that. Handle up, get on the bevel, get the bevel onto the wood, drop the handle, and I follow that curve around. Once I get to this uneven area here and I start getting the bounce, I go ahead and let the tool go out into space. Getting a decent gap between my tool rest and the wood, I'm going to bring my tool rest in. I still haven't cut clean at the rim. And I've got quite a bit that I need to take off of the bottom here. I can do that by just coming straight in. That's all side grain. That's the easiest way to cut the wood. I don't want to come in and come across this way. And in fact, listen to the difference in the cuts. If I cut into the side grain here versus the end grain here, you can hear that's louder. Now you can see the grain coming across. I've got my rings here. My heart center was right in here on this log. And so the grain is running much like these straws. It's running through there. And I'm trying to cut supported grain. If I come back and I cut the other direction, or with that last cut, I'm cutting right into those end grain fibers, the hardest way to cut the wood. If I gave you a pencil and asked you to sharpen it with a pocket knife, you wouldn't cut it from the lead down. You cut it from the handle back to the tip. We're doing the same thing, and that pencil trick or the straw trick is a good reference that you can use in your mind. How is my wood laying? Put that bundle of straws right there, or take a pencil and put on there. We're going to continue the cuts. I'm going to bring this tenon down to about 2 1/4 inches, or maybe a little bit larger. I like to do my roughed out bowls with a little bit larger tenon. Typically, I'll use a larger set of jaws. If you don't have that, expand your jaws out a little bit, go to the larger size, because once this bowl dries and moves, it's going to go oval at the tenon, and you'll need to have room to recut that and make it round again in order to come back into your chuck. All right, I've got this in kind of a rough shape. I'm not overly happy with it right now. We'll adjust that. I'm going to set that tenon right now, and to do that, I'm going to use my 1/2-inch spindle gouge. Slide down that tenon, close the flute at the end. The bottom wing acts as a scraper. Take any convenient straight edge you've got and verify that you're undercut or have a gap in the center here. So I've got my tenon cut. I'm 2.5 inches in diameter. That'll work with my chuck that I'm using here today. Now I want to come in and clean up this shape. I want a nice smooth curve. I may want a different style bowl later after it's dry, but I want a smooth curve right now to start with. And then I'll have enough wood left to reshape when I'm done. The next cut I'm going to show you breaks a lot of rules. I've been teaching you to cut down supported fiber. So as I come here, I start, and all these fibers are supported, and I explain that with the straw. I'm going to cut from the rim of the bowl to the base. By cutting from the rim of the bowl to the base, I've got my eye situated over the top of the bowl, and I can see the shape develop. I'm also cutting into those ingrained fibers a little bit, and so it doesn't want to just run on me. So it's much easier to develop the shape. I will still have the ability to come back, make one more cut if necessary underneath that, or in the proper direction, if I've torn grain out and I'm not happy with it. So I haven't sacrificed that. To make that cut, I'm going to reach over here, grab my 3/8 bowl gouge, freshly sharpened edge. Should be able to get my speed up to that 1125, which is max RPM for this bowl diameter. I want to come in and get underneath the saw mark so that I have the rim cut true. Stop and double check, make sure that I've got that. Not quite cut clean. Right here I've got saw mark, so I'll mark that point, come in just a little bit deeper, confirm that I've got that mark, or that area cut clean. Go back to my pencil mark right there. I am now cut underneath all the saw marks. Now I can take a cut from here to here and get a nice flowing curve coming through there. Now the handle's in my side. I've got a bevel already for my tool to ride. My left hand, which is my front hand, is just holding the tool down onto the rest. Drop the handle a little bit to open up the flute. And my eyes are watching the shape at the horizon. I'm keeping the handle tucked in my side and moving large muscle groups. As I come around. That didn't come around quite quick enough because I want to end down in this area, not up in here. So I'll come in, pick up the cut, anchor to the rest, find the bevel. There's my bevel and my cut. Again, D would be design, and I want a nice open flowing curve. Now, as I look at that, I've got my curve. I've got a little bit of tear out through here. Probably not the end of my world, but I don't like to leave it. If I leave that tear out, that's a rough surface that one is probably going to take a little bit more greenwood sealer to cover up, and two, I've got exposed the ends of those straws unevenly. And so I might lose moisture quicker through that area than I would on this side that's cut cleaner. So I'm going to make one more pass without my tailstock, coming from the base to the rim of the bowl with my sharp 3/8 gouge, and just come in and cut that clean. With that, I'm going to move my tailstock out of the way, remove my center. It's a lot easier to get this cut started with the tool rest tight at the start and hangover at the end than it is to start with the hangover and go to tight. As we get set up for this cut, I've got my feet running about 45 degrees from the axis of the lathe, about shoulder width apart from each other, and I'm planted down firmly. I'm going to lean into the lathe bed with my right hip. The tool is going to have the flute pointed towards me, bevel on the wood, and it's going to come in through here. My left hand, my front hand, holds the tool down on the rest, either with an overhand grip or an underhand grip. I can see just from the surface on that wood, this is cutting much cleaner. I'm getting a shine. You can see the shine coming off the tool in the wood. I'm just under that surface. As the handle catches my body, I start to shift my body weight. And right out to the end. There was one of my problem zones. You can see a little bit of evidence right there in the corner where I didn't get the bevel on the wood, and there's the other one, and they're both cut nice and clean. Everything's cut clean. I've got my tenon in there, and I've still got my original center mark. Do not remove your center mark. It's often very handy to have. So I've got the outside of this bowl done, and we're ready to take it off of the chuck and go to the inside of the bowl. So remove my hand rest, lock my spindle. Again, that edge can be sharp. Be mindful of that, as that you don't want to slip your hand on there. Now, my chuck came off of the spindle rather than off of the wood. Everybody's always concerned these screw centers won't hold well enough. Well, it holds better than the chuck wanting to back off. So I give that chuck just a little bit of a flip, see if I can get that to lock on better. Nope, nope. Plan B. Put my tool rest back in place. And I'm going to slide my tool rest in up underneath the rim of that bowl. I'm going to take my Tommy bar, mount it into the hole, bring it around, let the tool rest stop and lock the chuck, and then I can release that hold of that screw. That's a 1/4 inch screw and a 9/32 hole, and that works really, really good. Remove my screw center. Put my chuck onto the spindle. There's that little flip. That doesn't have to be a massive flip. You're not trying to damage the steel, but you've got 2 flat surfaces. One on the spindle, you've got a nice flat machine surface if you've got a good quality lathe. And 2, if you got a good quality chuck, you got a nice flat surface, and you're just putting those 2 flat surfaces together. They've got tension. It takes some tension to break that apart. Just like before, I want my grain running parallel with my chuck jaws. That way I feel that I'm biting an even bias all the way around. Then I'm going to take the slack up out of the scroll gear. That way I know I don't have any problems with it wanting to loosen up, or at least I can't blame it for loosening up. Reduce my speed. I'm running fairly true. That's all right. This is a green piece of wood. I'm not going to worry about the shear cut or the shear scrape that we did earlier. I'm going to set my rest up. My post is even with the rim on this one. I've got a 12-inch rest, and that way the more I can work in this area, the less vibration I have. And one thing to do, just for your own curiosity, is put your finger right over that post and then take your tool and tap the tool rest. Feel the vibration you've got there, put it out on the end, tap it, and you'll feel a whole different set of vibrations. The closer you can work over the post and over the banjo, the better off you are. While I'm on that subject, notice where my banjo is. It's tucked in here at an angle. It's in tight and as short as I can get it. I'm not trying to lengthen this thing out and get further away from there. I'm trying to shorten everything else up, everything I can. Vibration is one of the woodturner's enemies. Anything I can do to cancel out that vibration, I'm going to. We're going to go back to our 1/2-inch flute bowl gouge. First thing I'm going to do is true up the rim. I've got my tool rest set for standard tool rest height. Again, tool's level, cutting edge should be at center. As I get a little bit deeper, I may want to lower that rest. I'm going to move my banjo all the way out of the way, or I'm going to move my tailstock all the way out of the way, and then bring my speed up. Since I'm in a new mount, I've brought my speed down to 0. First thing I'm going to do, close the flute, drop the handle, and clean up the rim. Now, we're doing this as a rough out piece. I want to soften that corner, and I want to be cut true. Now I'm going to come in and start hollowing out. Got that classic skid because I didn't come up to a full neutral position. Handle level, flute closed, get the bevel first. I'm trying to keep my forces going, the forces of my cut going in towards the headstock as much as possible, not across the axis. Got a little weight out of there. Go ahead and bring my speed up to that 1125, 1150 range. You can hear that starting to growl at me. I'm coming around and starting to hit into those end grain fibers. So I'm going to stop right there with that cut and come back up to here. Now, I'm looking for about a 3/4 to an inch thick piece on this. That'll give the wood plenty of room to move. Now that wood in the bottom has the furthest reach. I'm hitting end grain. It's the hardest wood to get out of this piece. I don't want to leave any more of that than I have to. It'll be much harder to cut out once it's dry than it is wet, or as it is now wet. And I can leave it a little thinner in the bottom because there's less movement. I'm going to take my double-ended calipers, check them, make sure the ends match up as always. About an inch, about an inch. I've got an inch to the bottom of the curve, and then I've got the tenon underneath that. I can take out probably 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch of wood out of the very bottom. So I'll pick up my cut right about here and then try and drive it a little bit deeper. Now, as that cut came around, if you were watching the flute started fairly closed, and the more it came around, it naturally opened up. I started with my wrist uncomfortable, just like we'd talked with our spindle roughing gouges on rolling beads and cutting coves. I start uncomfortable and work to a comfortable position. Got plenty of wood. I'll show you one more time on that. So I come in, my wrist is in an uncomfortable loaded state. Anchor, bevel, pick up the cut. Ride that bevel all the way around. The more I get towards the center, the more open the flute gets. And try and catch that little nub in the end. It's good sport. Don't need that little ridge on the rim. We'll take that off. Now you're probably asking yourself, why didn't I just tuck that rest in there and shorten the distance that tool had to reach over? The reason is because if I stay on the bevel, I didn't really shorten the reach. There's my bevel. My tool's back here in the same location. Now I'm just unstable on the rest. I've stayed on the bevel and arced through there. You can tip it in a little bit, but overall, it doesn't get you what you'd think. Oftentimes it hurts. Okay, at this point, I've got this piece roughed out. I am a little thinner right there. So overall, I probably got an inch in the bottom by the time I remember my tenon and my little step that I put in there. And I'm about an inch there. That's in a good state to where it'll dry nice and even. It's ready to come out of the chuck. And ready to seal. I would normally take this from here, especially in the summertime. I might spritz it with water and then put it in a bag and let it sit overnight and then seal it. If you've been turning this for a long period of time, as you're turning this, you're throwing water out using centrifugal force or throwing moisture out using centrifugal force, and you've thrown it from the most sensitive areas right on that edge. If you take and seal that instantly, you don't have that moisture right there. So I like to put a little moisture into it with a spray bottle and then put it in plastic and let it sit. And I'll load up, if I'm doing rough out, I might be doing a bunch of bowls and load them all into the plastic bags. And then after 24 hours, then I'll seal them. All right, now that that's rested for 24 hours in plastic, I'm going to seal it. Before I do that, because this isn't my lathe, I'm going to throw some plastic over the top of the lathe so I don't get sealer on the lathe. I've got my bowl here. I'm going to use Tree Saver. This is a PVA, polyvinyl acetate based sealer, and it works very, very good. Your other option would be a water-based wax emulsion, and with larger pieces, I find I have much more success, better success with the Tree Saver than I do with the water-based wax emulsion products. I'm going to put some into just a container that I can brush out of. Don't pour out more than you need. I'm going to be handling the bowl when it's got the sealer on it. And I don't want it on my hands because I'm delicate. And I've got a disposable brush. If you want to clean them out in between uses, that's up to you. I just use disposable ones. I'm doing enough at bowls each time that I'm doing that it doesn't bother me to dispose of a brush rather than clean it. Don't be afraid to be a little overly generous here. In the scheme of things, I look at it as the sealer costs me pennies per bowl. The bowl's worth dollars. So I'd much rather put too much sealer on and have some run off during the drying process than not put enough on and have a cracked bowl. I've already got some time invested in roughing this out. I don't want to lose that. That time is very expensive time if this bowl cracks, because all I've made is firewood at that point. Make sure you get everything coated around and in the tenon is one of the problems that I see, or one of the places that I see get missed quite frequently. And I coat everything. I know some people only coat the end grain, but when you're thinking about how much of this bowl is end grain and how much of it is side grain, the side grain is about an inch wide path through here. Most of this, it's over 90% end grain. And I often will have my grandkids want to help work in the shop and do something, and sealing bowls is a good project for them. And if I tell them to get everything, they understand that. They're too young to understand end grain and side grain. It's just a good habit to coat everything. Now I'll normally set that up at an angle like that so that it can get air all the way around it. And once it is completely dried, or at least somewhat dried, that may only be an hour or so, then I can add, on my larger bowls, I second coat them on the outside especially, because that's where the air hits first. And by larger, I'm talking 12 inches and bigger, and I'll put a second coat after the first one has dried. So I'm going to set that up, let the air get around it. Once the sealer is dried, I'm going to put it away in a cold or cool environment, and primarily I don't want any air movement, or very little. Where I'm at, I have to use my garage as a storage place. Most of the time there's not a lot of air movement through there. I don't have HVAC in the garage, so it works out just fine. The only time there's air movement is when I'm in the shop working and I have the doors open. But I'll put this away until I start to see the movement in it, or if you've got a moisture meter, until you get down below 12 to 15% moisture content. I tend to use the movement more than I use a moisture meter. Now we're going to set this to the side. We'll change it for a dried piece. I'll show you the movement that's been in that piece. Then we'll mount it up and I'll show you turning it. Looking across the rim, you can see how this piece has moved. The sides have dropped down. My growth rings have radiated out there. They've tried to straighten out as the piece is dried. As I turn the piece over, I can see that my tenon is no longer round, it's oval. I still have my original center mark. And when I look at the markings on this piece, I see 1 of 3, or 1-3. That means this is number 1 bowl out of a set of 3. There are 2 more bowls that go on the inside of this. This set was cored out. It's high figured silver maple, SLV, would be short code for silver. I've got an 028. That tells me that this was the set 028. The 28 stands for the 28th day of the month that this was roughed out on. O is where it came in. I start with A in the day and I go through the alphabet. So I was in probably about 15, 16 sets when I hit this in there without actually going through the alphabet and counting it. But that also keeps that straight. The 2 other bowls won't have the silver mark on them. I just mark 2 of 3 and 028, or 3 of 3. The NFFS on here comes from, my son sells a lot of my roughed out bowl cores for me. And I grade from plain wood, which this would just say silver on it, to high figured, to heirloom. And then I put on some pieces at one time I wanted to keep for me. I put not for sale. Well, he knew I know what I'm looking for, and so I was high grading things, so he started selling those out quicker. So I added a second F to it, not for fricking sale. So he sells those first. But that's what that code is on there. That is a bowl, this is a set I wanted to keep for myself. Now, another advantage that the Tree Saver has here over the water-based wax emulsions is if you've got a concrete floor in your shop, when I go to turn this round and true this up, if you're cutting through that wax, you're basically hot waxing your shop floor, and they get very slick as ice. So if you're using those water-based wax emulsions and you've got a concrete floor, be very careful on there. I don't want to see anybody get hurt. We don't even allow the wax bowls to come into our classroom at Craft Supplies. So to mount this, I'm going to put my revolving center back up. All right, I've got my tail center in, my revolving center in my tailstock. I'm going to open my chuck jaws up a little bit, just the standard jaws. I'm going to put my bowl right against those jaws. I'm not worried about damaging this inside because I need to return it. I'm going to bring my tailstock up and into that original center mark. Tool rest, standard tool rest height. Fresh mount on this piece. I want to turn it by hand, make sure it clears, and then bring the speed up from 0 or minimum. My speed's up around 1100, which is fine for this size of bowl. I'll come in and true up the tenon. You see I have a rather large tenon here. I used a larger set of jaws when this wood was green, and now I can come in and size for the jaws that I have on this chuck. That cut, I'll show you a little bit more in detail as we do the dry bowl. This cut I'm using here. That starts to chatter a bit, I slow down. I'm going to try and get this cut to go all the way up. Sometimes they'll want to walk on your chuck. This one seems to be doing fine so far. Detail that tenon in with my 1/2-inch spindle gouge. Let's take a look at this. I've still got sealer here. Not quite around there, so another cut. You can start to see why this was marked not for frickin' sale. It's got a nice curl showing up through there. Running a bevel riding cut. All the way up from the base to the rim, or as far as the piece will let you go. Be careful as you ease that last little bit off. Sometimes if you force that, you'll get a big chunk that'll fly off, and you don't want that to hit you. Experience has taught me that hurts. One other thing to be mindful with the PVA sealers, that's dried hard. The wax doesn't dry hard, but the PVA dries hard, and it can be sharp. If you touch one of these the PVA while it's rolling and turning, it can cut you there. So be mindful of that. But that silver maple piece, that cut really pretty. If I put a sealer on that, that would really pop that grain out for you. But now this piece comes out from between centers. Would mount into the chuck, shear scrape the outside, do the rim of the bowl, cut the inside, and we'll learn those cuts as we do the dry bowl from the solid piece of wood coming up next.